John McMullen is more than just the 97.3 Eagles insider. He's more than just a national writer for the NFL. He's more than just a guy who used to cover the NBA. There has been 3 times now in the last week and a half that John McMullen has put up an article on 973ESPN.com saying the Eagles are interested or meeting with a player, and then that player gets signed by the Eagles within 24 hours. So John is more than just an insider. John McMullen is a prognosticator when he puts ink to website. Right, John?
Well, I'm not going to take all the credit for that. You got to give most of that to Howie Roseman. The matter is, once you know somebody's visiting, they rarely let that person leave the building. So you kind of know as soon as you get the information that today was Chris Givens was coming in. He met with the Jets yesterday. You kind of know the Eagles are only serious. They only bring people in when they're very, very serious. And I would say 90+% of the time they get something done, and that was the case again today.
So let's talk about Chris Givens. Obviously, the Eagles, they needed more depth at the wide receiver. They really only had 3 guys who you would consider to get any playing time after they released all of everybody who was on the roster. So what does Chris Givens give them that they didn't already have?
Well, he's a speed guy, so he can stretch the field, and that's something that desperately needed that they didn't have last season, certainly, and they really haven't had since Deshaun Jackson. And that's been the calling card of his game. He averages over 16 yards a catch in his career, but while they throw out that name, Deshaun Jackson, he's had nowhere near that kind of success. He's been a one-trick pony. So basically, to either get the ball down the field, he doesn't do much else. So he's not a complete receiver by any stretch of the imagination. As evidenced by the deal he got a 1-year contract for the veteran minimum. So this is not a difference maker. But when you look at a position that was arguably the weakest on the team for the Eagles, he helps because he brings something they didn't have, and he can at least push guys like Nelson Aguilar and Josh Huff, who are young players that performed very poorly last season, and you still have hope for them because they have physical gifts, but they certainly needed somebody on this roster to push them, and hopefully Givens can do that.
Do you think the Eagles may still go out and get another receiver? I mean, right now they really only have 4 receivers on the roster. I'm not saying it has to be a big name because a lot of the big names are off the market, but is there still maybe someone the Eagles may pursue to bring in?
Well, they have to bring in more bodies, and they have more guys that, nondescript players like Freddie Martino, Jonathan Krause. They signed Shontavious Jones, Xavier Rush, street free agents a couple weeks ago. So there are more names, but obviously you can't count on players like that. So there's no doubt they need more talent at that particular position. I don't think it's going to be in free agency. I think this is it for that because there just isn't that much out there at that particular position. I know they badly wanted Andre Holmes to re-sign with the Raiders. He's a big 6'5" guy that's really athletic. But he signed a 1-year deal that was worth $3 million. That was a little rich for their blood. It could be worth $3 million. And he got $1 million guaranteed, whereas Chris Givens got his signing bonus was $80,000 and he got $100,000 guaranteed. So you can see the difference in the second phase of free agency between those two players. Unfortunately, one guy was too rich for him. They had to settle for Givens. They're definitely going to draft a receiver or 2. It's just a matter of where.
Speaking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles insider, also covers the NFL nationally. John, it seems like, Howie Roseman, if he hasn't had to sign a guy for big numbers, he kind of has been getting guys kind of out of what you might call the discount bin. The deals he's signed with Nolan Carroll, with Chris Givens, and some people may even say the Leotis McKelvin deal. These are all guys that he didn't have to splurge a bunch of money on like some other teams are doing. So it seems like what we call Howie Roseman, this numbers guy, he's really living up to form.
Yeah, he is. I always say the one thing about Howie, the thing he has to prove is his personnel acumen when it comes to the draft, when it comes to picking players and making sure you hit on more draft picks than not. I think that's where he needs to prove himself. You always know he's not going to sign a bad contract, and that was one thing. The year he was gone, you saw the Eagles sign some bad contracts. And remember, technically, he was still in charge of the purse string. So on one hand, I kind of think he sort of gave Chip Kelly the rope to hang himself by signing players like Byron Maxwell to the big money, to Marco Murray, and even the Sam Bradford trade. If you think about the salary cap hit, the difference it would have been between Nick Foles and Sam Bradford, I kind of think Howie stepped back and was smiling a little bit. And you see by how he's done business this year, that kind of stuff is over. And if you look at it, a guy like McMullen is a perfect example. You're probably going to get just as much production out of him if he stays healthy that you got out of Byron Maxwell, and it's going to be a whole heck of a lot cheaper. And the second phase of free agency, that's where you get the bargains. That's where the guys stop getting overpaid. And I think it was a very prudent decision to bring back Nolan Carroll because he was the best corner the team had last year. And the only reason he didn't get a multi-year deal was because he broke his ankle. So I think some of these are smart signings. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to work, but it's worth taking the chance on.
There's a lot of speculation, John, about who the Eagles may pick at 8th overall. There's conjecture they may go offensive lineman with a Ronnie Stanley or a Taylor Decker. There's conjecture that they might go Ezekiel Elliott 8th overall. There's a lot of names and positions being thrown out there, but what do you think is the position that they need to prioritize with the draft, whether it's just the first round or the whole draft as a whole?
Well, there's a number of positions they need help at, wide receiver being one of them, offensive line, linebacker, they need depth, and another potential starter because I don't think you can necessarily count on Nigel Bradham to be a stone-cold lock. They need depth at defensive tackle. Even they're very, very good in the starting lineup, they have very little depth, and they still need more corner help. So those are the kind of positions you look at. But when you have the 8th overall pick, that's all out the window. You cannot pick for need in the top 10 of the draft. You have to pick who's best on your board. You have to stay true to it. You have to take the best player available at that particular point. And if it's at a position where you don't have a need, you brought up the name Ronnie Stanley as an example. Obviously, with Lane Johnson, Jason Peters, Eagles don't have a need at tackle. You still take them. You let the chips fall where they may. He might play guard. He's athletic enough to do it, and then sort of kick out as Jason Peters' eventual replacement when he leaves. The one thing you can't do is reach for need at number 8 in the draft. The Eagles know that, though. They're not going to do it. They're going to take the best player. And Howie has said he thinks there's always tiers in the draft, Josh, and Howie thinks this draft is 10 players deep, and then it sort of falls off. So that's why it was so important to him to flip positions with Miami and go from 13 to number 8 because he thinks he's going to get a top-tier player.
You can follow Eagles Insider, 97.3 Eagles Insider, John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. John, one of the names that gets thrown out about the draft, you mentioned best available player, is Miles Jack. Even though he's coming off an injury at UCLA, it's an injury that some people believe is not as severe to come back from as other injuries. Would he qualify as someone who is a best available player, even though it's not per se a need?
Yeah, he would. And I think, and I told Mike this last week, I think he's number 1 on the Eagles board. I really do. I think if he's there at number 8, the Eagles are going to pick him. Now, that said, I don't think he's going to be there at number 8. So, unfortunately, they're not going to have that opportunity. But you're right. When you look at him, had the injury, obviously. He already had his pro day, although he's going to have a personal pro day later. He didn't run the 40 But he did do a few drills. He's already jumping. He had a 40-inch vertical leap, and at this stage off surgery, that's phenomenal. So he has the athleticism. People aren't concerned. Jalen Smith is another guy who probably would have been in the conversation to be a number 1 overall pick, maybe top 5, but he had a catastrophic knee injury with nerve damage, and there's so much concern over his health. He might turn into a third-day pick. That's how bad it is. But with Miles Jack, everybody in the NFL is confident he's going to be ready when the bell rings, and he's one of the best players in this draft.
What is your opinion about the concept of drafting a running back in the first round? I've heard everything this week from different people, from you never draft a running back in the first round to you only draft it if it's a certain level of talent. What is your opinion? Because some people talk about Ezekiel Elliott for the Eagles at 8.
Yeah, and somebody on Twitter said I said they were going to pick Elliott, and those words have never come out of my mouth because I don't think he's even in the conversation. But if you have a transcendent talent like an Adrian Peterson, then you're a first-round pick. Otherwise, it's really, really difficult. And Todd Gurley last season was in that conversation. A lot of people in the NFL thought he was the best running back prospect since Adrian Peterson. I kind of agree with that, but he had the knee injury that kind of threw some other things into the mix as well. I don't think Elliott is that type of talent. I think he's a very good player. I think he's got a chance to be a 3-down back. But if you look at what happened in the NFL this season, Josh, specifically in Kansas City and Seattle, who lost all pro-level running backs and only got better, it speaks to the fact that the position as a whole isn't as important in this era of football as it once was. And that's just the reality running backs have to deal with, and that's part of it. The value of the position is just not worthy unless you're a transcendent Hall of Fame level talent. I don't think Elliott's that. I think he'll be a first-round pick, but I don't think he belongs in the top 10.
John, one more specific Eagles question. A texter from the text board wrote in, what is the situation with the Eagles place kicker?
Well, he had some serious abdominal issues, but he's on track to be back. The question is, he had such a great rookie season. I don't know if he's ever going to live up to that at Cody Parkey, and you hope he's healthy, and we're going to have to wait and see how ready he is at OTAs. But he's certainly on track. The Eagles have talked about it. They expect him to be back. They expect him to be their kicker next season. But that's one of those things that can really create havoc with the kicker, because if you think about the muscles they use, a lot of it is core related, and it's almost like a golf swing, and a lot of it can be mental. And you saw some of the struggles he had before the Eagles shut him down. So we have to wait and see. But right now, the team thinks that he's going to be the kicker come September.
By the way, John, I want to clarify for anybody who's wondering, the person who said Ezekiel Elliott first was Phil Sheridan. It wasn't you. So
no.
Let's blame.
And I like Phil. I like Phil, but I don't agree with him.
John McMullen. Let's talk some NFL here. So, an interesting series of events. C.J. Anderson, the Dolphins tried to get him on a 4-year, $18 million contract. The Broncos matched it, so they took him. Now the Dolphins are interested in Chris Johnson. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Chris Johnson really has never been the same since he was CJ2K, since he had the 2,000-yard season. And a lot of people think that he became obsessed with hitting the home run, so to speak, instead of just taking what was there. A lot of criticism, a lot of the same criticism Eagles fans had of LaShawn McCoy before he left, and the fact that, if 4 yards are there, just get the 4 yards. Don't worry about hitting a 50-yard run. And that's a lot of what happened to Chris Johnson in Tennessee. And he went to Arizona, and he performed okay statistically. But if you look at the film, he wasn't that good. And obviously Arizona had a great rookie running back, so he wasn't going to be in the future there. And the Dolphins are desperate at that position after losing Lamar Miller to the Texans. They thought they were going to get Anderson, as you mentioned, with the offer sheet, but the Broncos surprisingly matched it. And it's similar to wide receiver. There's not a lot out there in the open market. But if the Dolphins were a smart organization, they would realize you can get running backs even later in the draft that can be competent enough for you to win football games. They go back to Thomas Rawls replacing Marshawn Lynch. He didn't even get drafted last year, and he performed spectacularly. So you can mix and match at that position. But the one thing we know about the Miami Dolphins, though, they're always obsessed with big names.
John, I also want to ask you about, so this whole situation with Mike Wallace. He's now a Raven, but he goes out of his way to tell the media, I need to play for a good quarterback, obviously taking a shot at Teddy Bridgewater. You know, Teddy Bridgewater, we all knew even when he was in college, he's not a deep-throwing quarterback. He doesn't have a cannon of an arm like a Joe Flacco does, but the kid is a rookie. Is Mike Wallace just, sucking on sour grapes, or does he actually have a point?
Well, it's weird, number one, because if you talk to Mike Zimmer, the Vikings coach, and Rick Spielman, their GM, they raved about Mike Wallace as a leader when he got to the Vikings. And that was a little bit surprising because he had a bad reputation in Miami about complaining. And he really kept his mouth shut, even though he had a really, really bad year. And then all of a sudden he leaves and starts dropping bombs. So, if you look at what Mike Wallace did in Miami, if you look at what he did in Minnesota, he kind of proved he's a one-trick pony. And he does need a guy who can throw the ball deep. He had it in Pittsburgh with Ben Roethlisberger. In theory, he's going to have it in Baltimore with Joe Flacco, so it does fit his skill set better. But if you're a truly great receiver, you adjust to the strengths of your quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater's a tremendous intermediate thrower, 65, 70% completion percentage. Mike Wallace can't run routes, can't get separation. That's on him. That's not on Teddy Bridgewater. And I don't know a lot of people in this league, scouts, who don't think Bridgewater has a really good chance of being a very good quarterback in this league for a long time. So if you're pitting Teddy Bridgewater against Mike Wallace, most people are going to take Teddy.
Talking with John McMullen. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. He's 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles insider. He also writes nationally for today's Pigskin. Speaking of nationally, the Patriots made a deal that has a lot of people scratching their head. Chandler Jones got sent to the Cardinals, and while a lot of people feel like, the Cardinals basically just stole a super talented player from the Patriots, we always know there's a reason why the Patriots let go of guys, but it seems like they let go of Chandler Jones at a much younger age than what they usually do. I wonder what your insight was on that.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a head scratcher. Belichick is famous for the old adage in the NFL, it's better to give up a year too early on a player than a year too late. And that's what guys like, if you go back in the day, Ty Law, Logan Mankins, he got rid of them when he should have. And Rodney Harrison, they were very good players, but it was clear they were nearing the end. Chandler Jones, if anything, is an ascending player, one of the best pass rushers in football. And it is a very, very strange deal. The Patriots had a lot of issues on their offensive line last season. A lot of it had to do with injuries, but there isn't a ton of talent on that group either. Jonathan Cooper was once a top 10 pick. He's been a tremendous disappointment in Arizona. Maybe they see something. Maybe they think they can turn him into that top 10 pick. And they also got a second-round draft choice on top of it. I tend to give the Patriots the benefit of the doubt because of their history, but this is one on paper. If you look at what Jones has done and what Cooper has done, that looks like it's wildly in favor of the Cardinals, and we'll see how it works out.
It also seems like to me, John, with this deal that we know Chandler Jones had some issues off the field, but it pales in comparison with some other guys. I mean, people forget Dante Stallworth. He killed a man drinking and driving, and he was back in the NFL a year later. I mean, guys have done much worse things than Chandler Jones. How much do you think his incident affected the Patriots' decision?
Well, it could be. That's the one thing you put the asterisk on, and you say the Patriots might know something that we don't know as far as discipline or as far as what's going to happen. Because the NFL, after the recent issues started with Ray Rice, but also Adrian Peterson, Greg Hardy, all those high-profile cases, they've become much tougher on these issues. And we've seen very, very talented players. It's generally with substance abuse more than personal conduct. Martavis Bryant being the latest, suspended for a year. No matter how talented a guy is, if he's not on the field, he's not going to help him. So that could have certainly entered into the thinking of the Patriots. We'll have to wait and see if anything happens in that direction. You would certainly expect some kind of punishment, but I don't think it's going to be that devastating. So unless there is something out there that we don't know, the trade doesn't make a lot of sense, except for the reason that maybe, for whatever reason, Bill Belichick thought Chandler Jones didn't fit his locker room, similar to what Chip Kelly thought about a bunch of players here in Philadelphia. We won't know until we get all the information, but from a purely football perspective, it looks like a lopsided trade from the Cardinals' perspective, and that's rare when you think about how smart the Patriots have been over the years.
John, I got one more question for you. This just came over. Adam Schefter and Adam Kaplan are both reporting that the Ravens safety Will Hill has been suspended 10 games for violating the NFL's substance abuse policy. There was also this week you had Martavis Bryant who got suspended. It appears that Will Hill has the same problem that Brian and Josh Gordon have, which has to do with marijuana. I just wanted to ask you, it seems like more and more of these players are getting pegged for the substance abuse being weed. We know that marijuana is legal in certain parts of the country. We know that medical marijuana is also legal as well. At what point is this the NFL cracking down on guys, or guys just being really stupid because they know that testing is coming?
Guys are being really stupid. They really are. It's really easy to pass the NFL marijuana test. You get tested twice a year, once in the OTAs, once in training camp. Once you get tested in training camp, you know you're done for the year. You can do whatever you want from that point forward until the cycle starts again the next year. And most guys, because marijuana, there's a lot of players in the NFL that use it, and they never get in any trouble because they're not dumb. And it speaks to the addiction of certain players who can't stop. And that's the guys that get caught up in it. Because remember, when you hit the 10-game threshold, understand, I think a lot of people don't understand this. That means you failed a minimum of 4 tests. If you're suspended for a year, like Martavis Bryant, you're at least at 5. In his case, he missed a lot of them because he knew he was going to fail them. But that counts as a failure. You failed at least 5, possibly more, if you get suspended for a year. So it's not like a guy gets smoking weed one day and that's it, and he's gone. These are consistent violators of the policy. And when you bring up the legal ramifications, it doesn't matter. 50 states could ratify and say marijuana is legal. The players and the owners have agreed in collective bargaining. This is against the rules. You're going to be tested twice a year. It doesn't matter what state says it's legal, what state says it isn't. By NFL laws, you can't do it. And if you want to do it, you don't have to play in the NFL. And you can give up the 7-figure paycheck, but that's just part of it. And pointing out that Colorado or Washington say it's okay has no bearing on the NFL's collective bargaining agreement.
John McMullen, Eagles insider for 97.3 ESPN.com, NFL writer for Pigskin, and as well, you can follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen.